It was just after 8 a.m. when Jackson Ellis walked through the revolving doors of the Sapphire Palace Hotel. The morning staff bustled about in polished uniforms, greeting early guests with rehearsed smiles and practiced gestures. No one paid attention to the older black man stepping into the marble-floored lobby. He wore faded jeans, a wrinkled navy blue jacket, and a worn baseball cap. Pinned crookedly on the lapel of his jacket was an old American flag pin, dulled by time and weather. His boots were dusty, his hands rough and calloused. To most of the employees, he looked like trouble, or worse, like someone who'd wandered in off the street. Jackson wasn't surprised. In fact, he expected this. That was why he came alone, without an entourage, without a press release. He wanted to see how the hotel really operated, not the version they showed to corporate auditors or VIPs, but its true face. How they treated people when they thought no one was watching. And today, they were being watched very carefully. He wandered over to a large wall painting behind the concierge desk, studying the way the sunlight hit the brush strokes. It reminded him of his late wife. She loved landscapes. He was lost in thought when a sharp voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, sir." A young woman in a crisp blazer approached, eyebrows raised. "Can I help you?" Jackson turned to her, offering a small, patient smile. "No, ma'am. Just taking a look around." She looked him over with narrowed eyes, then at the pin on his jacket. Her nose wrinkled. "I'm going to have to ask what your business is here. Are you staying with us?" "No, not yet," Jackson replied calmly. That's when the manager came over. Daniel Morrison, mid-30s, slicked back hair, expensive watch. He didn't bother to hide his disdain. "Sir, this is a private hotel. If you're not a guest, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "We've had some issues lately," Morrison said, folding his arms. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issues?" "People loitering, harassing guests." "We can't allow that here," Morrison said. "Especially not with certain political symbols," he added, glancing pointedly at the faded flag pin. Jackson stood still for a moment, quiet. Then he nodded slowly. Understood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, his boots echoing against the marble as the doorman opened the door with mechanical politeness, not even looking at him as he stepped outside into the chilly air. Jackson pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket and looked down at it. Inside was the official deed and final transfer papers for the Sapphire Palace Hotel, signed, notarized, and sealed the day before. He let out a soft breath, folded the envelope again, and tucked it back inside his coat. They had no idea who he was, what he'd been through, or what kind of man they had just shoved out the door. But they were about to find out. Because Jackson Ellis wasn't just a veteran, or a wanderer, or a man in an old jacket. He was now the majority shareholder and legal owner of the very building they had just kicked him out of. And he wasn't coming back angry. He was coming back with purpose. Back in his car, Jackson Ellis sat in silence for a moment, the envelope still resting in his lap like a quiet secret. Outside, the street buzzed with early commuters, honking horns, and a light drizzle brushing the windshield. But inside the man's car, the world was still, calm, patient, just like him. He didn't need to prove anything. He never had. After 3 decades building companies from the ground up, serving in the military, and surviving more boardroom betrayals than most could count, Jackson had learned one thing: silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And today, strategy would speak for itself. He reached for his phone and tapped once. "Alyssa," he said when his assistant picked up, "I'm on my way in. Let the team know I want the boardroom cleared by 9 sharp." "You got it, boss," Alyssa replied, a hint of something excited in her tone. "And the hotel staff?" Jackson allowed a brief smile. "Let's see how they handle surprises." 20 minutes later, Jackson stepped out of the elevator on the 32nd floor of the Ellis Holdings headquarters. The building was sleek, glass-walled, humming with purposeful energy. Everyone greeted him with polite nods and respect. Not because he demanded it, but because he'd earned it. In the boardroom, 10 executives were already seated, laptops open, coffee steaming. At the head of the table, Jackson's chair sat empty, until now. He entered with the quiet force of a storm and took his seat. "Morning," he said, glancing around the table. "Today's agenda has changed. We're talking about the Sapphire Palace." Murmurs rippled around the room. "We finalized the acquisition yesterday," said Rebecca, his VP of Operations. "The transition paperwork is done, but there's been a situation." Jackson's brow lifted slightly. "Oh, there's been a situation." He leaned back, opening the folder on the table and sliding out a photo. A still shot from a security camera. Him standing in the lobby, face calm, jacket zipped, the flag pin clearly visible. This was taken less than an hour ago. There was a pause. "That's you?" one executive asked, stunned. Jackson nodded. "Walked into my own hotel this morning. Got told I didn't belong. Wasn't a guest. That I was loitering." He let the silence do its work. "And the manager?" Rebecca asked carefully. "Daniel Morrison," Jackson replied. "Didn't bother to ask who I was. Didn't ask how he could help. Just made an assumption based on what I looked like." He tapped the photo again. "I wore this jacket on purpose. I wore this pin on purpose. I wanted to see the real face behind the luxury branding. And I saw it." No one spoke. No one dared. "I'm not mad," Jackson continued. "This isn't about revenge. This is about standards." He stood, his voice now steady and sure. "Every person who walks through that hotel's doors, no matter what they wear, where they come from, what pin they have on their jacket, should be treated with dignity. Respect, not suspicion, not condescension. Because if this team doesn't build businesses that reflect our values, then we're no better than the ones we criticize." The room was silent. "Effective immediately," he said, "I'll be meeting with every department head in that hotel. Staff training will be overhauled. And as for Mr. Morrison," he looked to Rebecca, who was already nodding. "Handled." Jackson gathered his papers, but before leaving he paused. "Never assume someone's worth by their clothes. You never know who's writing your paycheck." And with that, he left the boardroom in silence, the same way he had entered. But now everyone was listening. Later that afternoon, the polished marble floors of the Sapphire Palace Hotel gleamed under soft chandeliers, and the lobby bustled with the usual rhythm of clacking heels, bellhop carts, and business chatter. Except today, that rhythm was offbeat, tense, uneasy. Word had begun to spread, not publicly, not on paper, but through whispers in back hallways and huddled conversations among staff. Something had happened that morning. Something big. And then the elevator doors opened. Jackson Ellis stepped out, not in his simple travel jacket, not with a quiet demeanor. Today he wore a tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks, and a lapel pin that caught the light with every step. He walked with the calm authority of a man who didn't just belong in the building, he owned it. Behind him, Rebecca and 2 senior board members flanked his sides, walking at his pace. No introductions were needed. The concierge who had nervously smiled at him that morning stood straighter, clearing his throat like a man trying to remember a line in a play he forgot he was in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ellis," the concierge said, this time with a tone soaked in respect. Jackson nodded. "Afternoon." He didn't stop. He kept walking, straight toward the manager's office. Inside, Daniel Morrison stood by the window, sipping an espresso and scrolling through something on his phone. His assistant had barely whispered, "Mr. Ellis is here," when the color drained from his face. Jackson stepped into the room. "Mr. Morrison," he said, voice even. "I believe we've met." Morrison set the espresso down too quickly. It wobbled, splashing onto the saucer. "Mr. Ellis, sir. I wasn't informed." I didn't know this morning it was you. Jackson raised a hand. Relax. I'm not here for an apology. I don't need excuses. What I want is to make sure that no other guest, especially one who doesn't look the part, is ever made to feel like I did this morning. Morrison swallowed hard. Understood, sir. I let my assumptions get ahead of my professionalism. That's one way to put it, Jackson said. Here's another. You made a snap judgment based on appearance in a 5-star hotel that's supposed to be known for world-class hospitality. He let that hang in the air, then quietly added, effective immediately, you'll be stepping down. HR will walk you through the transition. Morrison didn't argue. Couldn't. He just nodded. Jackson turned to Rebecca. I want new policy protocols written by next week. Unconscious bias training for all staff. And a guest relations audit at every location. We'll fix this. And then, before leaving, he turned back one last time. You see, Mr. Morrison, this place isn't just about marble floors and premium linens. It's about people. And people deserve to feel like they matter. That's how we build something worth keeping. Jackson stepped out of the office. Behind him, the former manager sat down heavily in his chair, and out in the lobby, a new chapter for Sapphire Palace had just begun. By the next morning, Jackson's calm return to the hotel should have faded into routine. But routine has a way of disappearing when a single tweet turns into a wildfire. It started with a blurry photo. Jackson standing at the check-in desk in a travel jacket, arms crossed, being gestured toward the exit by Daniel Morrison. A caption read, "Witnessed." This man turned away from luxury hotel lobby. Staff assumed he didn't belong. Turns out he only owns the hotel. At first, it was just a few likes. Then it hit a travel blogger's feed. Then a local journalist. By lunchtime, it was trending. Hashtag he owned it, hashtag CEO in the lobby, hashtag you never know where you're talking to. Reporters flooded inboxes. News vans parked across the street from Sapphire Palace. Guests whispered in elevators. Hotel staff walked on eggshells. Alyssa burst into Jackson's office around 2 p.m., iPad in hand, eyes wide. We've been contacted by CNN, BBC, Forbes, and wait, Oprah's team. Oprah, Jackson. He looked up from his laptop, unbothered. What do they want? They want you. Interviews, comment, a quote, anything. She paused. Are we responding? Jackson leaned back in his chair, quiet. Then, no comment. For now. Alyssa hesitated. Jackson, the public's on your side. This could be a powerful moment, not just for the brand, for a bigger message. He tapped a finger on the desk, thinking. The truth was, Jackson had always preferred to let action speak. He hadn't gone back to the hotel for revenge. He wasn't interested in viral victories. But watching the online momentum build, he realized something. This wasn't just his story anymore. It had become a mirror, one that reflected something deeply wrong and deeply common. A few hours later, Jackson called for a full staff meeting. Not the corporate kind. No suits, just people. In the lobby, housekeepers, bellhops, servers, security, front desk associates. They all gathered, nervous, curious. Jackson stood at the center. No microphone, just presence. What happened to me last week, he began, should never have happened to anyone. Eyes locked onto him. But it does. Every day. To people who don't wear suits, who don't have titles, who just want to be seen as human. He looked around the room. I wasn't going to speak publicly. I didn't want this to be a spectacle. But maybe silence isn't strength anymore. Maybe the strongest thing we can do is tell the truth. He paused. Sapphire Palace will not be known as the hotel that turned away its owner. We'll be known as the hotel that learned from it and fixed it. For good. The applause started slowly, then built. Staff who'd never met the CEO now felt like they understood him. Guests who overheard from balconies applauded too. And the next morning, Jackson's quote made the front page of the New York Times. "True luxury isn't how a place looks, it's how it makes people feel seen." The media buzz slowly began to fade. Days passed. Guests checked in and out, and the Sapphire Palace Hotel returned to its quiet elegance. Jackson resumed his usual routine: early mornings, handwritten notes to staff, surprise kitchen visits, and evening walks past the marble pillars of the grand lobby. On the surface, things were back to normal. Until one morning, as Jackson stepped into his office, he saw something unusual resting on his desk: a cream-colored envelope. No stamp, no corporate markings, just his name in handwritten cursive. "To Mr. Ellis, from room 814. He frowned slightly. Room 814? It was a modest corner suite, not typically used for VIPs. Curious, he opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of thick stationery. "Mr. Ellis, I don't know if you remember me, but you knew my father. I believe you two served in the same community outreach program back in Atlanta years ago. My dad always said you were the one who pushed him to apply to college. You probably don't know what that meant to him. I never got to thank you, until now. I've been staying at your hotel for the past week on business. I saw the article. I watched your staff meeting from the mezzanine. And I realized something. What you said about dignity, about being seen. That's what my father always taught me. He passed away 2 years ago, but seeing your face on the front page reminded me of him. The man who quietly helped others, who never asked for recognition. You haven't changed. Thank you for being that kind of leader still. Sincerely, Tr. Washington, room 814. Jackson read the letter twice, then a third time. The name clicked. Washington. Her father was Robert Washington. They'd met at a struggling after-school program in a church basement when Jackson was still just a 20-something college kid tutoring local teens. Robert had dreams of being a teacher, but didn't believe he'd get anywhere with a record and a GED. Jackson had spent a whole summer convincing him otherwise. And now, all these years later, his daughter, grown, accomplished, staying in his hotel, was thanking him, not for a discount or a luxury suite, but for dignity. He sat back in his chair, silent for a long time. That night, Jackson walked to room 814 himself. He didn't knock. He slipped a note under the door. "Dear Ms. Washington, I remember your father. He taught me as much as I ever gave him. Thank you for reminding me why I do what I do." For Jackson, it wasn't just about policy anymore, or even justice. It was about legacy, the kind built in quiet rooms, passed down through generations. It had been 3 weeks since the headlines faded, but Jackson Ellis's name still carried weight in quiet conversations. The hotel's reputation soared, not for luxury, but for leadership. Guests returned not just for the linens, but for the principle. For the man who saw people, not just profit. But not everyone was impressed. On a rainy Thursday morning, Jackson received a calendar invite from someone he hadn't heard from in years. Meeting with William Pierce. 11 a.m. Executive Lounge. William Pierce was no stranger to Jackson. He was the majority shareholder of the company that owned Sapphire Palace's parent group. Sharp-suited, steel-eyed, and always circling for the next margin boost. The kind of man who could smell a weakness or a political inconvenience. At precisely 11 a.m., Jackson walked into the lounge. The rain tapped against the glass as the skyline blurred in mist. Pierce was already seated, sipping something dark from a crystal tumbler. "Jackson," he said without looking up. "Always on time. I admire that. And you're always early." "I admire that too," Jackson replied, taking a seat. Pierce set down his glass. "Let's get straight to it, shall we? I've been getting calls. From other hotels. From the board. From people." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "About the incident. About your speech," Pierce said flatly. "About the way you made our company look like it answers to feelings." Jackson said nothing. Pierce leaned forward, voice low and surgical. You embarrassed a senior staff member. You allowed press into a private matter. You've made us a symbol. Some call it noble, others say reckless. And now investors are nervous. Nervous men don't spend. Jackson folded his hands. So you want me to apologize? Pierce laughed, but there was no joy in it. No, I want you to correct course. Quietly. I want you to sign this. He slid a folder across the table and agreed to step back from public statements. No more social commentary. No more staff interventions without board review. You'll stay on as CEO, of course, but only as a figurehead. Jackson opened the folder. It was a gag order wrapped in corporate language. If I don't sign? He asked calmly. Pierce's gaze didn't flinch. You'll be asked to resign. And your staff, the ones you're so fond of, they'll be replaced too. Restructuring, we'll call it. The rain hit harder now. The silence between them was heavy. And then Jackson closed the folder. You ever been tied to a pole in the woods, William? He asked quietly. Pierce blinked. Excuse me, have you? Jackson said. Because I have, for wearing a hat someone didn't like. I stood there thinking about what kind of man I wanted to be when someone untied me. And it damn sure wasn't a puppet in a penthouse. Pierce's jaw tensed. I'll decline your offer, Jackson said, standing. And if you come for my staff, you better be ready to answer to more than just me. Because this place isn't run by money, it's run by people who care. Without waiting for a reply, Jackson walked out. That night, a petition appeared online. We stand with Jackson Ellis. Within 48 hours, over 250,000 signatures poured in. And William Pierce, he didn't come back. Jackson had just finished his morning walk around the hotel's grounds when Alyssa, his assistant, rushed toward him, wide-eyed and out of breath. There's a letter, she said, holding an envelope with the White House seal embossed in gold. Jackson blinked. Is this a joke? She shook her head. It came by special courier. No return address, just this. He took it carefully, the heavy paper cool in his hands as he opened it. A formal but warm script greeted him. Mr. Ellis, your recent actions have captured more than attention. They've reminded us of something essential: courage with grace and leadership with backbone. I would be honored to meet with you in person. President Eleanor Winters. He read the letter twice, 3 times. Still didn't feel real. By Friday, he was in Washington. The White House was quieter than he expected, less like a fortress, more like a reverend cathedral. He was escorted through tall hallways lined with paintings of leaders past, some flawed, all remembered. Finally, he was shown into the Oval Office. President Winters stood near the windows, backed by morning sun. She turned as he entered, offering her hand with a smile. Mr. Ellis, thank you for coming. Jackson shook her hand. I'm still not sure I'm not dreaming. She laughed. That makes 2 of us. Please, sit. They talked for over an hour, about integrity and leadership, about the public's hunger for authenticity, about how one small act of standing up to arrogance had sparked a national dialogue. I didn't do it to make a point, Jackson admitted. I just couldn't not do it. Exactly, Winters said, eyes alight. And that's why it mattered. Then came the real surprise. I'd like to offer you something, she said, folding her hands. A position. Not in my cabinet, though I suspect the press would eat that up, but as part of a special bipartisan committee on ethical standards in public service. It's long overdue, and I want people who lead by example. Jackson was stunned. I'm not political. That's exactly why you're the right person, she replied. You didn't chase cameras. You didn't grandstand. You just did what was right when no one was watching. Jackson looked out the window toward the White House lawn, a mix of nerves and quiet pride rising in him. Will it cost me my hotel? Winters smiled gently. Only if you let it. He nodded slowly. Then yes, I'll serve. As he left the White House that day, the world outside seemed bigger, not just in scale, but in meaning. What started with a worn cap, a misunderstanding, and a quiet dignity had led him here, to something that might change more than one hotel, maybe even the country. Jackson Ellis stepped off the return flight with far less fanfare than when he left. No cameras, no press, just the hum of a modest airport and the crisp breath of his hometown air. He didn't need a red carpet. He never did. As he walked through the terminal, a familiar voice called out. It was Captain Larson, recently promoted since 2 corrupt officers had been charged and removed from the force. She offered a warm smile. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Ellis." Jackson laughed. "Didn't think I was coming back, did you?" "We were hoping," she said, "but honestly, after the White House, thought we might have lost you to bigger battles." Jackson looked around at the community center where he'd volunteered for years. Weathered walls, flickering lights, familiar creaks in the floorboards. No battles bigger than the ones at home. The next week passed in a blur. The community outreach program was different now. Not perfect, but alive with new energy. Volunteers were showing up early. Young mentees were engaged and participating. The old cynicism was gone, replaced by a culture that didn't just fear accountability, it welcomed it. One morning, Jackson found a note slid under his office door. "You saved more than this program. You saved my belief that good men still stand." Anonymous. He tucked the note into his coat pocket without a word. But the biggest surprise came on a Saturday afternoon as Jackson sat on the front porch of his modest home, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. A young boy approached the steps, maybe 10 or 11, nervous, holding something behind his back. "You the guy from the news, right?" the boy asked, eyes wide. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "That depends. Was it the good news or the bad?" The boy grinned and held out a folded drawing. Crayon, bold strokes, shaky handwriting. It was a picture of a man in a blue suit standing in front of a crowd, holding up a sign that read "Truth Matters." Jackson blinked. "That me?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, you're brave." Jackson smiled, took the drawing, and thanked him. The boy beamed, then took off running. He stayed at the paper for a long while. And for the first time since that long morning in the hotel lobby, Jackson let himself feel it. Not pride, not vindication. Peace, because he knew something now. Real leadership wasn't about position, rank, or how many people clapped when you walked into a room. It was about what you did when no one was watching, and when someone finally was. What they learned from you. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the quiet hum of a better future buzzed in the air, Jackson leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Not bad for an old man in a baseball cap."